We're going to start our final session with concluding comments. It's essentially intended less as overarching conclusions and more reflections on the proceedings of today as well as last night. I'd just like to introduce our guests, in many respects, responded to the proceedings. Charles Waldheim, Irving Professor of Landscape Architecture here, and Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture. Gerdo Aquino, President of SWA, as well as Professor of Landscape Architecture at University of Southern California, and Kevin Holden, Technical Lead of Landscape Architecture with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and also MLA from the GSD 1991. I'd just like to mention one thing, just in terms of the context of both the symposium as well as a recall of some of the ideas that we've discussed. What's important as part of the three concluding panelists here, they'll say a few brief words, is that there's a representation of the institution here, a representation of disciplines, a representation of different institutions, a representation of different disciplines as well as different agencies. They all involve government, academia, professions, and it's fairly important to be able to understand the crossovers that are involved with this subject and strategy of landscape infrastructure that clearly, from the position of different historians, scientists, designers, are all working as urbanists. And I think that's a fairly important aspect to address. I'd just like to mention also within the context of the symposium to recall these notions that have been tabled by the American Society of Civil Engineers in response to the crisis of infrastructure, or the so-called crisis of infrastructure, and the desire for a few things: increased federal planning or investment, state and regional planning, the investment into notions of resilience and sustainability, and notions of investment. Now, it's not necessarily the intention to corroborate or confirm or even substantiate those ideas, but to simply recall them in these final concluding comments. We'll start with Gerdo, and then lead with Kevin and then Charles. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. Oh, Sabine showed up. Good. I have a comment. Going on the French theme, giving a lecture and giving 3 points is good. But as Shalin said, we need to go big, so I'm going to go with 4. So the first comment or observation I have is on pollution. And in '88, I had a chance to study with H.T. Odom at the University of Florida, undergraduate study in landscape architecture, and you were forced to really understand what Florida is as a state, and that the highest elevation in Florida is 300 feet. So basically the entire state's a wetland. And in studying with H.T. Odom, if you've ever met him, or you can't meet him now, but he's an amazing guy, genius, and he had given many observations about what ecology is. And I remember one lecture, one statement he said on pollution, and I quote, and I wrote this down, I've carried it everywhere with me. He says, the reason why we have all this polluted drinking water is because of examples like landfills, point source pollution. He says the problem is that we have a certain aesthetic and way of looking at our environment that wants it to be clean and sanitary. And so the notion of having litter everywhere, pollution, doesn't make sense. You got to put it into a landfill. So what he recommended back then, this is 1988, is that we should just litter everywhere equally. And that you'd have this kind of distributed system that it would, in effect, maybe neutralize pollution and not have so many point source pollution effects like landfills. And everybody, of course, freaked out. I was writing notes, and just a sophomore in college, very impressionable, thinking, well, what does that mean for a landscape architect, for anybody, actually? And so that one kind of stands out on pollution. And when you look at cities like Los Angeles and other cities, the distributed model is happening everywhere. Wastewater treatment facilities are being decentralized, and it's happening. So he was really ahead of his time. The other observation I have is on politics, culture, and technology happening at different speeds, with the exception of the point clouds, which is happening really fast. I can give you 3 examples where I think politics, culture, and technology are happening simultaneously. At the smallest scale and the simplest scale is maybe rails to trails. For over 30 years, that program is being rolled out, and it's part of over 60,000 miles of trails for people and bicyclists all over the United States. And where 30 years ago it was a very passive sort of system, today it's an economic model for bringing cities back financially. I mean, look at the Katy Trail in Dallas. Every developer wants to be a part of that trail simply because it means revenue. And how do you pay for it? Well, Katy Trail generates over $400,000 of money to help maintain Katy Trail, which all comes through all these new developments along the edges. Amazing model. At a medium scale, look at cities like Atlanta. They put together this project called the Atlanta Connector, which is looking at freeway right-of-way and putting development smack in the middle of it. And the community loves it. Talk about getting acceptance from the communities. They're the ones pushing for it. So I think it's happening at that scale. And then the probably largest scale of politics, culture, and technology happening at the same time is the South to North Water Transfer Project in China. I mean, they're making it happen. They need it, and it's happening. The other point I want to make is on expanding scales of expertise, the kind of who's in charge. I think anybody in this room could probably be the prime consultant on projects. I mean, all of us every day have a stack of RFPs on our desk, and the first question you ask yourself is, well, who should be the prime? Can I do it? Should I do it? What's the team? And landscape architects, I think more than ever, are saying, yes, I can do it. And it's because there's a kind of hyper-osmosis going on where people are understanding the technologies all at the same time. There's a kind of urgency that's happening, and there's a lot of, I think, effort in academia to push landscape architects to move beyond their typical boundaries. And then probably the final point I want to make, my number 4, is on financing. And that's probably the biggest issue, and I touched on that with Katy Trail. But in Los Angeles, which is really the main precedent I have because I live there, the city of infrastructure, we have about 5 cap parks happening right now, all under feasibility studies. And that's essentially putting parks over freeways that are in a cut condition. They're very expensive, but Hollywood Freeway Cap Park is the best example because about $500 million is going to be spent in rehabbing it, and for another $500 million, you'll have a public park in the park porous area of the city, but at a cost of $200,000 a foot, linear foot, $1 billion a mile, which is the same cost of a subway, $1 billion. I guess that's the kind of the precedent these days. So those are my comments, and love to hear from Kevin with all the comments regarding Army Corps.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate getting to be here today, and this has been an awesome discussion. And I'm going to take away a lot more from this discussion than I'm going to leave behind, so I apologize for that. But it struck me as I was listening to this almost overwhelming discussion and amount of information that, sometimes it's easier just to get up and dance than to try to describe dancing. And as I was listening to this today, it's, at some point you can become almost overwhelmed with the complexity of it. And I think it's more difficult to discuss it in some ways than it is to do it. And I become convinced that as landscape architects and fellow aligned professionals, we have the skills to make a difference. And I think it's just time to go out and start doing it. The civil engineers have the position, and old habits, I guess, die hard. that's civil engineering has kind of been the tradition of infrastructure development in this country. And when I look at us as landscape architects, I have to say that I don't think we've ever really tried. We've been out there and we've been doing things, but as far as making a real concerted effort to get in there and influence the direction of infrastructure, I don't think the effort we've put into it can compare to what the civil engineers have done. And so I think that's where we are today. Is we need to get out there and try. And I was here at the career fair yesterday, talking to a number of people, and what I've been trying to do for a long time is talk talented landscape architects into coming to work for the Corps of Engineers. And I'm just speaking for the Corps today, but that's true of the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Forest Service, and numerous other agencies out there that are doing infrastructure type work. I've worked with engineers for, this is my 21st year of working with engineers. And I gotta say, it's interesting. These are smart, intelligent people, and sometimes their focus is kind of the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Well, that's really efficient, and I mean, that's their strength. And, but they're not adverse to what we have to say. And I've developed a number of good partnerships with engineers. And I kind of heard some of my own thinking in some of Wendy's words about the Corps of Engineers and the the civil engineers in there. There's 37,000 employees in the Corps, plus or minus. Almost all of them are civilians, and about, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 are engineers. They're incredible people to work with. I've had a lot of fun working with them, and all they need is an intelligent interpretation of the problem and reason to look at it from a new dimension. And they're right there ready to go. All except the most dinosaur among them are right there and ready to go with you. So, I mean, as a thought to leave the room with today, what I'd like to encourage you to do is think about a career in infrastructure. Think about coming to the Corps and helping us solve these problems, because we have a lot. Believe me, after 20 years, I can tell you that as landscape architects, we have a lot to bring, not only to the Corps of Engineers, but to infrastructure in general. So, go out and get those jobs and start making it happen. I really want to thank you for being here today. Amazing, overwhelming amount of thinking in the room. I could hardly get to sleep last night, and I think it's just all the mental power in this town. It's like microwaves, and it wasn't I think people must start hitting the sack around midnight, because then I finally, I think the microwaves kind of toned down a little bit, and I was finally able to get to sleep. But it's nice to be back in Cambridge and get charged up again. I hope it doesn't cause tumors, but thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Kevin and Gerdo. The line for applications for the Corps forms on the right, and those of you that want to go to work for SWA in LA or Houston, that line forms on the left. It occurs to me, I mean, in addition to the fact that I'm very conscious of the notion that I'm the last thing standing between you and a beverage, is that it occurs to me that it may in fact be easier to dance, but on the academic discipline side, we often observe people dancing, and we often think deeply about dancing, and are often invited to give our thoughts about other people dancing. And so I've been reflecting over the course of the last 24 hours on the impact of these developments and these conversations on the academic discipline side. I began 24 hours ago in this room talking about how landscape infrastructure and landscape urbanism and ecological urbanism nest very well together with each other and yet are easily distinguishable. And it's important that we distinguish them and have a moment to discuss landscape infrastructure on its own terms. And at the same moment, I can't imagine the formation of the field of landscape architecture, particularly in the United States, without thinking about its commitment to infrastructure at the very beginning. And so in that regard, I was struck by Neil Brenner moderating the second panel after saying very little at the front end and kind of opening it to a range of questions, kind of brought it to a close by saying something to the effect that the idea, the model that somehow our object of affection around urbanism should concentrate in the city is itself an outdated notion. And I think that's right. That struck me as correct. And at the same moment, if that's true, it has enormous implications for those of us in this building and in these disciplines. If that's true, and if in fact we should focus on urbanism and urbanization and its infrastructure, it's not necessarily focused on the city and an opposition between the city and the externality of biological process. It strikes me that there's an equally profound paradigm shift potentially for us in landscape architecture. I think, for the better part of the last half century in our field, we've been operating under a paradigm in which nature exists outside of human agency, a kind of classical, if not modernist definition of ecology, in which urbanization was the problem. And having said that, what I've heard over the course of the last 24 hours is that we need to fundamentally rethink that paradigm. I think both from the practices we engage in, the models and habits of thought, the tools, the representational tools that we have available, to be able to think through our commitments both to social and cultural production, but equally to environment and to ecology, absent the idea of our extraction from those natural systems. I think if that's true, both these proceedings in these 24 hours and also a conference that we held here a little bit over a year ago called Critical Ecologies that Chris Reed and Nina Marie-Lister organized, that these two events somehow taken together have me thinking that we need to rewire our models of the natural environment and our relationship to them. So among other things, I want to invite everyone else here to thank and congratulate Pierre on organizing this event.
Well, first, I think you're only as good as the speakers and the moderators, and I think you've all done an incredible job. I think really in terms of taking a risk, coming here from the different worlds of practice, different worlds of research, different worlds of scholarship that you've been involved in. So if you don't mind, I'm actually really grateful to you, the speakers, the moderators, concluding panelists. So please. Also, I just... Now that I'm truly, I think right now the drinks and you are only about a meter away. So I'm actually going to give you a small option, which is I just have a couple of words to say. But if you really want to go to the washroom or get a drink, that's fine. But if I would just like to not necessarily provide a concluding comment, but actually just an observation based on some of the words that we've heard today and yesterday as part of the kickoff from Rosalind yesterday, because in many respects we can't help to ask here in terms of the moment that we find ourselves right now in the first decade of the 21st century. In terms of understanding that we are at a critical period at the end of serviceable lifespan of major urban infrastructure. Joe Brown from AECOM, for example, has stated that in this generation, we will rebuild between 60 to 70% of urban environments. It's incredible. We're recycling environments in which we're going to be living in. That is our work ahead of us. What's really interesting is that there are very large companies that are master planning that future right now. The document that we put on the backside of the program was really a first attempt to be able to understand what that future is. There are people that are designing our future and they're planning it, but they're keeping it under a very tight lid. This is not a conspiracy of civil engineering. It's more just an understanding of the charting of the future work that's ahead of us. I think key to that, or a major question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we engage this? And I mean, a couple of things. To lighten this up a little bit, I'm satisfied with the fact that, first of all, we could go all get tattoos saying "Essayons, bring it on." I'm finally relieved to know that we can get rid of urban yoga and start judo. Thank you to Dirk Simons. And I'm also relieved to a number of people that have referred to nitrogen, knowing that like every time we take a shit, we're contributing to this new economy. But I can be a little bit more serious about it, though, in terms of questions that have revolved around landscape infrastructure itself, both as a system and strategy. I think what's key to it, and from the speakers, is that there's a double entendre to it. There is a double-sidedness to it, that we can understand infrastructure from a landscape scale, that it involves other biophysical systems, that in fact it is dynamic, it is temporal. And what that involves is, in our work, is the possibility also from the designers that we've heard of today and urbanists. It's clear that we can begin to also, in the same way that engineers have talked about design, that designers can talk about engineering. I think this is extremely important. Now, I think we're a long way away from saying that, you know, we're going to transform this place into a graduate school of engineering. But I think to think beyond the divisions between disciplines or even collaboration is to begin to think of ourselves as leaders in the future design of infrastructure. And I think it involves thinking that we do design and engineer, but I think it's also about being critical and understanding that there are limits to these systems, to certain types of systems, and that we also can de-engineer, and that's part of a design project. I think the other flip side to it is to be able to understand the landscape of biophysical systems as infrastructure. And what we need to do is we need to account for them. We need to map them. We need to record them. We need to visualize them. We need to represent them. And that gets us part of the major mapping project that we're involved in right now in all design disciplines. I would also argue from a strategic perspective that we can begin to understand that there is in many respects, a project that's ahead of us that we should heed, from the words of Kate Ascher in terms of her work with the city works and anatomy of a city. And not to reduce her work, but actually I think we can learn from her work and understand that we've been writing a lot for ourselves. We've been speaking a lot to ourselves in the past century through disciplines, but I think we need to speak to disciplines and people outside. I think designers talking to designers, architects talking to architects, landscape architects talking to landscape architects is not going to get us very far. I think what we can do is actually feel confident, and I would love to take this group and go to the next annual conference of the American Society of Civil Engineers and actually just say exactly the same thing to see how that would go over. Because I think we could learn a lot, and that's reciprocal. I would also say, in conclusion, that we can also become confident in understanding that the engagement of ecological systems as part of an urban project entails us to start thinking about how we can posit. And Dongze, we're okay without the slides, so it's fine. In many respects, there are two things that I'd like to mention here. Is both it's a caution as well as an ambition of the project that's been tabled by the speakers here today, is that in many respects, I think our task, our imperative, and the urgent imperative right now is to be able to understand and qualify our work in terms of understanding the processes and the forces and the flows of urbanization, because I think if we don't understand them properly, they're going to just keep on designing us. That's what's happening. Every time, as soon as June 1st opens up the Atlantic hurricane, we're going to see it happen over and over and over again, and we can just let it go by. I would say that perhaps in order of magnitude of the way that the field of civil engineering has treated their discipline with authority, I think designers and urbanists and scientists and historians that are dealing with these subject matters that deal with both ecology and infrastructure can positively state the case that ecology needs to be seen as a matter of national or urban security. And I think as soon as we take that turn, as soon as we place our work on that platform, I think we'll be able to make incredible change. So based on this, I'd like to thank you all for keeping with the program over the past day and the past 24 hours. And again, I'd like to thank the moderators, the panelists, the speakers for coming from far and wide to be with us for a very short period of time. It's been extremely fruitful and productive, and I think it'd be really nice to grab a drink on the outside. So please, thank you very much. And our reception here is just on the outside.